Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. The first hour is dedicated to whatever questions you have around media or virtual production. The second hour is dedicated to something we've decided to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about mic placement. We've talked a lot about mics, but where do we put them? So we're going to talk about our opinions and what we found works and doesn't work. Let's jump into the questions. Bill, let's take it away.
First one comes from Matt Cooley of Montreal in Canada, and he asks, I need to order a bunch of headset mics for a client. What is the current preferred audio interface, Techrise or something else?
Go ahead, Dan.
Before I got the ATEM, I used the Sabrent audio interface, and they make a couple different ones. There it is on Amazon. I'll put a link in the chat. I like that one better than the newer one that has, I think that one has a little more possibility of strain or snapping on it on the side of your laptop.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so I kept my headset where a lot of you guys have moved on to better things, but I've kept the headset. But I use the MXL MicMate, pretty inexpensive. It can take any XLR input and make it into a mic.
Go ahead, Bill.
And I just think, watch out. Some of them have level controls, and I think they've, in my experience, they've been inconsistent and noisy. So I would opt for one without a level control. Just make it a direct patch.
Yeah, and the main thing you're looking for as you look at it is whether it will accept a TS connection. A lot of these, so the headsets are a lot of the headsets are TS, not TRS. And the ones that are problematic, like the Techrise, the newer Techrise, the older Techrise, was fine with TS. The newer Techrise is not. It wants a TRS. And now we have found, disassemble them and take out the pin or take out the contact, and then they work fine. But you have to go through that process to get them to work. If you want to just buy them and use them, Sabrent is probably the better solution. Next question.
Paul Terpstra of Janesville, Wisconsin's up next, and he said, what color is best for a backdrop? In addition to the normal speaking videos, I want to be able to do instructional videos, and it seems like a dark color would make it hard to see my parts and so forth. What material is best?
Go ahead, Courtney.
As a rule of thumb, you should always have your backdrop to be a darker shade, a more subdued color and a more subdued brightness than your foreground. So it's a matter of lighting yourself up above your background. And don't choose a bright garish color unless you're trying to attract the attention of toddlers or something like that. And blues tend to work best because they contrast best with skin tone. I'd stay away from green because it can reflect onto your face and make you look sickly. But those are just general comments.
Good, Stuart.
I have some slightly contrasting opinions on this matter. Now, you've said parts, but you haven't said what sort of parts, if they're plastic or metal and whatever. Look for a color wheel and find a background that is a contrasting color, i.e. it's on the opposite side of the color wheel to the things you're trying to display. Where we talk about darker backgrounds, it's not necessarily the hue, but how bright it is or what its luma value is. So you can still have different colors, whether they're dark greens, blues, black, red, but it's lit at a lower level to what the foreground is. And that is what makes it stand out, having the three-dimensionality that the lighting brings.
Yeah, the lighting is the big thing, and generally when I'm trying to figure out a foreground or background, I'm trying to think of something that's less saturated than the subject, and is darker by about 1 to 2 stops than the subject, and tends to be complementary. So that's why you end up with a darker, cool background. Is all that math for a person, but your parts may drive something else. I will say that lighter backgrounds are much harder to light well, because you end up underexposing your foreground element, whether that's a person or a part. Because you're trying to not peak the background. And so you want to make sure that you can give the hero object, whether that's a person or a piece, the most contrast possible, or the most exposure possible. What we're using, or a bunch of us use, are these Last-to-Light 6x7 backgrounds. But then, if I'm showing parts, you want a desk that you can kind of show them on, and that can have a lot of different things. But I would recommend more neutral than more saturated. Next question.
Comes from Tlaloc Lopez Waterman, our friend from Astoria, New York, and he says, I just went to the Audinate website and noticed that Dante is now supported on the M1 through Rosetta. Has anyone done any testing with this?
I don't think anyone's tested it yet. It must be brand new. I know that this has been a point of contention for a lot of folks. I will say that I don't. We're seriously thinking of getting rid of all the audio, Dante, the Dante video virtual sound cards, because they're not as stable, and it's just easier to put something outboard on them rather than using the internal one. So we've had enough dropouts and odd experiences that we're looking at moving completely to hardware. I mean, it's just what it wants to do. Go ahead, Jeff.
That was exactly what I was going to suggest to do. If you don't need multi-channel, the DVS is very cost effective if you need multi-channel audio. But if you just need 2 channels in or 2 channels out, then yeah, those USB adapters, the AVIO adapters from Audinate are just flawless.
And we're looking at cards, even cards for the computer. Just put a card in that's going to let us do multi-channel in and out. But it's it's just but it's all being managed in hardware. Next question.
Rupert McRae's up next from Dallas, Texas, and here in the panel. He says a Zoom room can be set to auto answer, but can it also be set to auto start video upon auto answer? And if so, how would one go about doing that?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's a setting inside of the back end that says always turn Zoom Room's video on for internal meetings, and you just have to flip that on. But for external meetings, I don't believe, due to privacy reasons, that you can turn it on. I know that Jonas has a way to do it with the API. If it comes in with it off, you can also click the little launch button on that room and then turn the video on here just by turning the camera back on with the stop and start video. That should have just turned off the, yeah, that just turned it on and turned it back on for the scope box that we run here in office hours. That's the controller.
Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, up again with under what circumstances can the presence of a Zoom room in an otherwise 1080 meeting drop the entire meeting to 720p?
Go ahead, Chris.
I actually haven't seen that. I'd love to talk to Rupert about it. But in the overall topic of Zoom rooms, I'm very close to canceling my subscription because I'm able to get that the holy grail in the Zoom room is screen plus head, both at 1080. And I figured out how to do that with Zoom ISO. And I might be done with Zoom rooms.
For what we use them for, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I haven't seen it. I haven't.
For the weird way that we figured out how to use them, yeah.
But have you actually seen that happen, Rupert?
I haven't yet. I think I've heard Jonas talk about it anecdotally. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of either his experience and, just this morning we were in after hours, we were trying to troubleshoot some people's video dropping from 1080 persistently down to 720. So I'm just trying to bolt these things together, see if there's a connection.
I also don't know a way in a Zoom room to check the resolution other than, yeah, he looks pretty sharp. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I
don't
know.
Like we use the stats in a Zoom meeting.
I think usually we're in a Zoom meeting looking at the stats to see what people are sending. But to your point, I think without running a resolution chart, I'm not sure if we'd be able to see it. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, in the back end, there is some stats under the admin. You have to have a business account, but you can see exactly, precisely everything that you're sending down to the kilobits per second, including resolution and name of camera. There's lots of stuff in the back end.
And it's a second app?
It's a back end. So there's an admin dashboard, part of the business plan.
Yeah, I have the business plan. Okay.
Yeah. There's in the dashboard, it has an enormous amount of information. Next question.
Comes from Ray Franklin in Mount Dora, Florida, and he asks, he notes, I have 3 computers, each with 2 plus an ATEM Mini Extreme. What does the panel use to control the mouse and keyboard in this situation? I'm not happy with the Logitech MX Keys keyboard and the M720 mouse.
Go ahead, Stuart.
I'm assuming he was referring to 2 monitors on each of the or each of the computers. But simple solution is like literally go into a store and try all the mice and feel which ones feel the best. But one little tip that I've got for the way I set things up is I have mice that are different shaped for each device. So it's a matter of feel, not a matter of having to look down and see which one. So the one that I use for Zoom on the computer is just a tiny little one, and the one I've got for vMix and whatever is a completely different mouse. It just eliminates confusion as you're doing things by touch, especially in a darkened environment like you'll have in a production facility.
Go ahead, John.
If you don't want to be the mouse juggler, then I suggest you use this program called Synergy. It lets you run software on all three, and then you can move your mouse and type on each one of the computers from one set of keyboard and mice.
Go ahead, Tucker.
That is exactly what I was going to suggest. Synergy is absolutely fantastic.
Jeff?
And I'm going to pull in Alex out of the hat for this. A real KVM, like Adder or something that's keyboard.
The only thing that is hard with a KVM is when you have multiple monitors, because now you're trying to
Not
jump.
with the right KVM.
Okay. All right.
Adder, you can span monitors, you can span machines, floating the mouse around just like on Synergy, but it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing thing when you have a righteous KVM that you can reach and touch any computer that you have on one display right here. 20, 30, 100, doesn't matter.
Go ahead, Serge.
I have a mouse here that has one USB connection, two Bluetooth connection. And with just one click, I can switch from a computer to another computer. So I will send the link to Mukana. It's a Dell mouse.
It's interesting. I've never seen a mouse that connects to two different computers at one time. Next question.
Comes from Danny Law in Malaysia. And Danny says, some YouTube live streams, the audio is behind, trailing the video for the entire stream. However, when switched over to another live stream from another channel, the audio and video is in sync. What could be the cause of that?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Most likely it's the hardware coming into YouTube, accidentally splitting the audio and video together. YouTube used to have that problem, but since they've adopted a lot of multi-codecs to bring it into one, I haven't seen that in a very long time for YouTube to happen. So most likely it's the hardware, the back end. I've even seen Restream. I've had a stream where I was on Restream going into YouTube and the audio and video were out of sync. Somebody said that. I just stopped my Restream, restarted it, which YouTube has this cool feature that you can uncheck a box to say if your stream stops, don't stop the YouTube stream until, and then when it comes back on, then you're moving forward from there. So most likely it's the hardware that the back end that's doing that.
Go ahead, Courtney. Oh, Courtney, I'm sorry. Courtney just told me that he had an audio problem, and then I just threw the ball to him anyway. Anyway, so when Jeffrey is saying hardware, it's the user hardware, not the YouTube hardware that's having the problem. So it's the user not getting the sync correct, and this can happen with low bandwidth situations. It can also happen with their overcorrecting for their audio sync. So their audio was ahead, and they overcorrected that. It can also mean that they're pushing the audio through additional processing that will, something like audio hijack can slow the audio down past what the video delay is. Just by putting too many processes in. We do processes where we do spatial audio, and that actually has the audio fall behind by as much as 400 milliseconds behind the video. So there's a couple of reasons that can happen. But yeah, it's probably on the user end, not on YouTube's end. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael next up, and he says, what would you recommend for an inexpensive starter headset for somebody just starting with virtual meetings?
Go ahead, Stuart.
The absolute bargain basement answer is the ones that came with your phone, because they will have half decent audio and you already have them. So most laptops these days also have TRRS plugs, so you can plug into that.
Go ahead, Dan.
Just the one everyone talks about all the time is the Pile headset, which I got a couple months after being with you guys and still using it. I also just use a Bluetooth earpiece for listening to you guys.
Yep. Absolutely. Pile and Paulson and Pile are the two that a lot of folks, the ones that we send out in our very small kits. Next question.
Moving on, Paul Terpstra from Janesville, Wisconsin says, what is the best color for a backdrop if you want to do normal talking head videos and instructional videos? And perhaps what is the best material to buy that out of?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, the best material is probably going to be plasterboard, like for a normal house, because you can paint it any color you want. The choices of color, if you want to be able to adjust the color at the back with lighting, which is the simplest way to do it, either gray or white. But if it's white, you have to make sure all of the natural or available light in a room is not hitting that wall. So you just hit it with a splash of color, and it's whatever color you want it to be.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think the main thing is contrasting the face, color wheel. So look at this. Stuart mentioned it earlier. What is opposite? That's why I put the little blue on my background.
And go ahead, Jeffrey.
And it's also important to remember, if you're wearing a green shirt, don't use a green screen. Or if you got a color that you're yeah, unless you want a floating head, absolutely. But any show where you're highlighting colors, your background probably should be some sort of color that will pop you out a little bit more and not blend you into the background.
Go ahead, Bill.
And remember that smoothness can be a distractor, wrinkles can be a distractor, actually. So these pop-ups that have a wireframe, like those car windscreen sun protectors, can be really useful because it pops out to be pretty flat and even, and then you can fold it up in a much smaller space.
And as I said here, the one that I'm using now is a Lastolite 6x7 gray. It's gray on one side, I think black on the other. And I have it right in front of a window, so I actually have another blanket behind it to block all the audio, block the stuff coming through. But it's a nice. I don't have anything to look at, and so until I have a set, I do think that a set looks better if you have books or something else back there, and you can drop it out of focus. The main thing to remember is that detail behind you also increases the load on Zoom's compression, so you will look less sharp because you have a complex background. That's the reality. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he asks, when do you use a drift correction on macOS when aggregating audio devices? I tried aggregating a Roland MC101 Groovebox via USB with my Waves SoundGrid network and had success without it, but should I be using it?
Drift? I don't even know what that is. I mean, I'll be honest with you.
I wonder if he means sample drift over time. We run into that a lot when you're got 44 and 48 together. You will see video and audio drift apart.
Yeah, go ahead, Tucker.
That's the closest thing I can imagine.
I know that you can aggregate devices. That's kind of one of those tricks, like Audio Hijack and some of the other things, that they're good tools to have in your toolbox to get you out of a jam, but I wouldn't probably build a solution around aggregate audio devices. That's just me personally.
Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael says, I've been debating whether to have a mixing console in the center of my setup, below my screens and in the triangle with my monitors, or to the right and put a keyboard controller in the center. Which would be more ergonomic as a workflow?
Go ahead, Leo.
Well, it really depends on how you use your equipment. And I think every single person has a different example and setup. I think you need to try it. One of the things I found with where I moved my MacBook is the one thing that I find difficult is unlocking things with the fingerprint key, because I've actually moved the Mac well away, and that's the only key I ever use on the keyboard of that anymore, because I've got a keyboard in front of me. But you've just got to try it out, Douglas. There is lots of you'll find something that really this is too far or this one's too close, but it's a good problem to have.
Go ahead, Stuart. Okay, Stuart.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking up the answer for another question because I was concerned it might go into politics and we don't get a contact in. But as for mixing and whatever, simple question. Can you type one-handed? If you can, then the keyboard can go anywhere. But generally, small vision mixers, you will use single-handed. Same with small audio mixers. So I would actually put the mixer offset and then go with the keyboard right in front, because you type with two hands.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what is most important about what you're doing there. Is the most important thing should be right in front of you, and then the second most important thing should be on your dominant hand. That's all I would say. Next question.
Moving to Rupert McRae, and Rupert asks, how does the Avaya, A-V-A-Y-A branded version of the Huddle Camera compare to the regular HuddleCam version?
Go ahead, Guy.
So I have the HuddleCam right here, and I did buy a few of the different knockoffs. These housings are popular in China. You can source those, and what matters is the firmware and the chip. So I bought a couple brands where they were like overly aggressive as far as the sharpening, and so it just looked unnatural. And when I wanted to dial it back, I couldn't because the controls weren't there. The other thing that you get with the HuddleCam is the remote control, so you can assign those presets. And firmware. I mean, it's the biggest thing. Just like this bird dog, they don't make the sensor, they don't make that housing. They just source those and then they put their firmware. So you just want to get what is it going to cause you a headache and what looks best. But if you could get 2 of those for the price of one of the HuddleCams, maybe that'll be okay in your world to get the, it's kind of a toss up.
Time, money, quality. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
This was because I actually got the Avaya, which does come with the same remote as the PTZ or the HuddleCam, PTZ optics, whatever you want to talk about. And I think it is the fact that Avaya makes these and that HuddleCam actually buys from them. And the reason why was because I actually put the HuddleCam firmware onto the Avaya chip. Now, I'm running through my Sony right now. This, forgot to hit the auto live. There we go. This is through the Avaya through the HDMI cable. This is through the USB cable, and this is running 4K 30 frames. So a little bit of problems with the greens, and this is a little bit farther away. So this is zoomed in about, I'd say about 4.5. So if it works a little bit better when closer up, but as you can see, it's not too bad back and forth. And the only other factor is there's a piece of plastic in front of the lens that we've talked about and thought that it might actually add to the problems than a HuddleCam would do. But the firmware is the HuddleCam firmware 2.8.5, I think is the current one, where the higher end one for the Avaya, I would highly recommend to strip it off, because the one thing it does do is every time you plug it in, it'll turn off the HDMI part of things, and you have to go into the settings and return it back on.
Next question.
Next question comes from Carl Marxer in New York, and Carl asks, I wanted to ask Chris Fenwick and Alex about what happened on October 1st, 1998 and why we care. He posted this on Twitter yesterday.
Very quick, Chris.
I want to, for the record, say that I understand the rules of office hours, and this is not a topic for office hours.
There you go. Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael, who often asks here, and it's for a live streaming workflow in the studio. Would it be better to route my synths into an interface mixer directly without a macOS aggregate device in the path? I could see the USB macOS 2DAW to SoundGrid path adding too much latency to live use.
I think that you want a piece of hardware there. I think you need a piece of hardware to aggregate that. I wouldn't try to aggregate it in the Mac. Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael is right back, this time with, could the Belfast method help make traditional broadcast workflows more disaster tolerant by enabling remote operation?
Go ahead, Jeff.
If you consider the Belfast method distributed workflows, then yes, absolutely. And that's what we're doing for sure.
Liam.
Yeah, I was reading it. So the problem I have actually is it can't. Having things external to a room can actually make problems for you. So if you are actually delivering something in a room and then trying to look up disasters, it's actually more, if the whole of the event is contained in one location and having everybody there, you're less likely to have problems of breakages in different places. So it's always a combination of whether separating things you think are going to increase as you increase complexity and you increase what you think is redundancy, you are likely to increase the opportunity for disaster.
Yeah, and I think that you're just moving the liability somewhere else for a lot of it, depending on what you're doing. Yeah, go ahead, Tucker.
Sorry, old school. I forgot. Yeah, I think that you're always in that situation weighing the benefit of, can I get a better professional than I can get locally versus the risks that are associated? Because having a more consistent team that you're not having to fly places can outweigh the, if you have good redundancies in place, can outweigh that. So that's kind of what we're going through every time.
Yep. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is back, and this time he says, even if you don't have the live audience reaction, with the Belfast method or the Mobley process, could you teach the technical side of theater, sound, lighting, and video in a distributed, networked environment?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all on your method of teaching. If you're talking about just teaching, But as far as operations and things, yeah, absolutely. You could definitely create that workflow, and many of us are already doing that for sure.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I do this all the time with a group of volunteers and show them how to set up cameras and do things. It's called apprenticeship, and it's been around for many years. We just have to do it virtually now.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I would call it like a witness camera. If you could put a GoPro on set, or for Matt in the Kitchen, we put up a Zoom room which had a PTZ that anybody can control. And had I really thought about it, I would have pointed out things as we were setting it up, like, hey, this is a Cardellini, this is how it hooks on, this is how we're putting up a safety cable, and we could have really walked through some of these things and been teaching the entire time with that witness cam. So it just depends on what you want to do. A Zoom room with a PTZ is a pretty fantastic method to be able to talk to other people on the other side. So
yeah, you're going to see more and more of us doing that because that really is there's kind of layers of it. First, watching the show, then watching the behind the scenes of the show and listening to the comms and seeing what people are doing. These are all integrated ways to just kind of slowly start to understand what you're looking at, then be part of Q&A, then have access to the hardware. Now, I do think that as you continue to build more virtualized venues, whether it's a person's house or whether it's a venue, you start using different kinds of equipment. Like you start using more PTZs, you start using more moving heads when it comes to audio and lighting. You start doing things that can be, I don't have to keep having physical people moving things around inside of the space. It's just a different way of approaching the project, but it's definitely doable. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, I just was going to note, as I was reading that question, I got a little uncomfortable because I realized that a lot of our audience is continuous and they come back and they will understand Belfast Method and Mobley Process and the rest of that. We talked before about having some sort of a wiki somewhere where these office hours terms that we toss around like everybody knows them for the new people could be helpful to let them get in on that.
It's just part of being, here. You'll sink in. If you don't understand it, then ask. You can ask questions about it, or you can come to after hours and be part of it. We'll eventually get wikis, but I'm not too worried about it. It's
fair enough.
Again, I think the thing that I'll say about all of that is that in every community, like when we were kids, no one explained anything to us. You're just around it, and if you hear it often enough and you connect it to what it's there, you'll figure it out. So we're very old-fashioned in a new way. Next question.
Moving on, Morgan Price from Victoria Beach, Columbia says, probably for Chris Fenwick specifically, any experience yet using the pluggable dual link HDMI out for key fill output to an ATEM?
Go ahead, Chris.
I have not. I don't know many software applications that do that. Tell me one. If I have it, I'll give it a try.
Go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, the thing I would be a little bit cautious of with something that has two different HDMI outputs is that unless you're into a pretty high-end card that has sync locked outputs, you can wind up with drift between the two outputs, and so you may have your key and your fill not match perfectly, which can cause some little artifacts. May not be enough to notice, but something just to keep an eye on.
So for Fenwick, Memo Live, Presenter Pro, QLab, all of those will do key fill. So those are,
I still have Memo. I'll give it a try.
Yeah, those will all do key fill. Next question.
Comes from Sergey Blondin here in the panel from Montreal, Canada. He says, need recommendations for a Bluetooth transmitter to use with my Flow 8 phones out.
You can use the Rode Go, number one. I've used it. You just reverse the what you are using as a transmitter. You plug out the output of your headphone out into the transmitter, and then you take the receiver and you listen to it. So I have two Rode Go's and I push them both directions. One is my microphone, the other one is a listen device. We got another. Go ahead, Serge.
Yeah, the thing is, I want to be able to use my AirPod Max with the Flow 8.
I'm sorry. Bluetooth. I wasn't. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I've tried several different Bluetooth transmitters, and I'm not sure if there's any Bluetooth 5 transmitters out there. There's got to be, but there's always that little bit of latency that comes through when you're doing that. If you don't need it for exact placement of things, then that's fine for that. But I'd look for something Bluetooth 5. Otherwise, there's a lot of Bluetooth 4 out there that you can plug in.
Good, Bill.
And Connector wiring can be important if you want to do this, if you want to switch the transmission thing, because normally transmitters, particularly the high-end professional ones, have TA5S or something like that. And if you can't change that from that to what it needs on the other end to switch the packs, you can get in trouble. Now, most of the inexpensive ones, like the Rode Goes, they're just 3.5 millimeter, and there's plenty of ways to switch those, but just get it done ahead of time so that you know. Don't try to do it on set.
And the one place to look, and I didn't find one specifically, but one place to look is is JK Audio. They make a lot of different Bluetooth solutions, mostly for comms, but they have a lot of solutions that will convert your 5-wire or your not 4-wire, 2-wire, 5-pin. All these other things are all stuff that they convert to Bluetooth. So so it might be something for you to look at there as well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. And he says, how does the Komenda fit into Mukana ecosystem, and what specific use cases would it be the most useful for?
What you're using right now is actually closer to Komenda than it is to Mukana. so we just call it Mukana. So it's easier. So that'll become clearer in the future. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael will step next with, could an OSC to Mackie Control translator enable integrating legacy applications or software like eMotion LV1 into an automated workflow?
Go ahead, Tucker.
Yes.
Concise award.
Very short. Next question.
Robert Soji of Los Angeles is up next. What keyboard, mouse, and control surface do you recommend for Final Cut Pro editors?
Mr. Fenwick.
An Apple aluminum keyboard and a Logitech M500 mouse. Full stop.
There you go. Next question.
Darn it, missed it. Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. Apple keyboard events are often discussed as the gold standard for presentations. Is this still true in a digital first world? And who provides the gold standard for other formats like digital first music performance?
Go ahead, Chris.
I think it was keynote events, not keyboard events, but considering the previous question, I think they're great. I agree with Alex. I think the let's bring so-and-so up on stage and hand them the button stuff is painfully awful to watch, and I never want to watch that again. I never want to be sitting in an audience like that again. It's awful.
At some point, I do think that we're going to get to see that again. Like, there's going to be this uncomfortable thing that happens in the next year where companies try, maybe in the next year, I don't know, maybe they'll give up before they stay ahead of themselves. But there's going to be some point where companies try to go back to the old way of doing things, and it's going to be painful to watch. And they'll do it once, maybe do it twice, and then we're done. Like
there's there's so much momentum in the event production company business. That's what they do. That's all they do. They've been doing it for about 40 years now, and it's a huge train. And it takes a worldwide pandemic to make them take a year off, but they still have that momentum pushing them. These people are chomping at the bit to go back to the old ways of doing things. It's awful.
And there's a big push that everyone has about, the press have to be able to touch the stuff. Well, you can still do that. Just let them watch a movie, come out and hang out with the Apple employees and touch the gear and get the food and get the little go bag and all the things that they're going to get from it. They can still have the same experience. They just don't have to have such a boring stage experience anymore. Go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, as far as who's really nailed it on the digital first, my opinion, Frame.io's presentation a few months back was by far the best thing that I've seen so far.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think the thing that live events offer is a captive audience because you've got them there in the room, and it's more difficult for them to be just looking at their phone without being obvious. And the big event producers hire professional companies to stage the show, and a lot of times they'll have, like Disney, if you're putting on a show at a banquet hall at a Disney hotel, you can hire them, and they will actually put on an entire musical performance from one of their many properties to entertain the audience. And that's something that's a little tougher to do in a digital first situation. And it keeps the attention up, as well as serving food in a banquet type situation.
I think the hardest part that people are dealing with right now is that when you are in a digital first environment, the content actually has to be good. like it just wasn't that good before. Like there was all these things. There was dancing Disney characters, and there was free coffee and free muffins, and there were people that you wanted to see and people you got to hang out and talk to. But the content was like horrible, and it's been horrible for like I have been to hundreds of conferences and thousands of sessions, and the content, it's horrible. Like we sit in the back and you hope to glean one tip out of the back of a session, and while you're answering emails and working on next week's projects and texting each other and tweeting about things. And I mean, that's what the experience is when you're there. And as someone who has a reverse camera who has to shoot people in the audience, I can tell you how hard it is for us to find people that were paying attention. All the hunting, 15,000 people in a huge venue, and we're hunting and pecking, trying to find one person going like this, just nodding their head like they were into it. They're all like this. They're all head down, and they're looking. It's just one person. And
I
it's
cut that footage all the time. You're lucky to get somebody looking up from their computer at the stage for a moment and then looking right back down.
Back down again. Go ahead, Chris. You were going to say something. Just more of the. No, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. It's kind of like the difference.
Yeah,
it's the difference between close-up magic and a giant stage illusion. Like if you do close-up magic, you really have to know magic. Right. You can get away with all kinds of crazy if you're, Doug Henning or those guys.
Right. Yeah. So I think that now that suddenly we are really accountable for the content, people are having it's a real existential questioning.
We have nothing to show.
What are we doing here? What are we doing
nothing
here?
to show.
Yeah, and everyone just keeps leaving. That's because they were all leaving before. They just weren't leaving with their feet. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas here on the panel says, typically what types of problems, has the panel found to be solved by firmware upgrades to the ATEM Mini range?
Go ahead, Leo.
So Blackmagic, along with a lot of other providers, I got locked. Hopefully you can still see me because my camera's just locked out.
We can hear you.
Okay, my Blackmagic ATEM has just locked. That's the sort of thing.
Get that firmware.
Firmware update.
You need a firmware update.
Yeah, that's it. It's one of those days, isn't it? It's just really gone. I'm hopefully I'm going to come back on. Blackmagic, along with a lot of other providers, they do update their firmware on a regular basis. They absolutely ship hardware out, and they never have the firmware ready on time, is what I find with this. And literally, any Blackmagic you buy, as you get it out the box, and the same with most of the stuff from Behringer, it needs a firmware update before you can even use it. It doesn't actually work out the box until it's had a firmware update. Some of the things on the Blackmagic, as an example, is a number of the buttons don't work at the moment. In fact, they still don't work. So on the Extreme, we've got these buttons on there, and we don't know how to use them because they're not there yet. They built the hardware. One thing they did this week is they've just fixed that the 3G converters work with the ATEM Mini. They came out this week that the 3G SDI to HDMI converters have been fixed for use on all the second, third, and fourth HDMI connectors.
Interesting. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
One good example was when the ATEM Mini Pro ISO came out. The one thing I was noting was the temperature of the device was getting past the 120-degree range that they had. They did a firmware update, and that brought it right back down because it was like 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and brought it right back down to 120 once the firmware update came on. Further, they put on an update that you could lower the dimmability of the lights, and by dimming the lights, that actually brought the temperature down even more. So yeah, many different firmware updates to do some simple things.
Good, Courtney.
And as evidenced earlier in this broadcast, my complete PC crashed, and it's been unstable, and I'm not sure whether it's the drivers from Blackmagic or my audio chain. But as something is now incompatible with the latest version of Windows, and it's a cat and mouse game. As your operating system in Windows or Mac will update itself, then the drivers may be in contention with something. So it generates incompatibilities until you update them all. But sometimes when you apply the latest patch, it breaks other things. So it's a never-ending story. And remember, when you update a Blackmagic software, it usually requires you to plug the hardware in to do a firmware update in the connected hardware.
The cool thing of it is that often what's fascinating is that often Blackmagic will just give you whole new features. Like we had a 2ME switcher that suddenly became a 4ME switcher with a firmware update. So they're trying to push what they can do with the chip, which is unusual for most hardware manufacturers. They're not trying to sell you a new one. They're trying to make the one you have better, knowing that builds a relationship and has you more likely to buy the next one. Next question.
Comes to us from Robert Soji in Los Angeles. He says, does Final Cut Pro have a native LUFS meter? And if not, what plugin do you recommend?
Go ahead, Chris.
It does not. It is my opinion that in post, it's not really that important. Alex, I'm curious on your opinion. Have you used LUFS meters pre-office hours? What's your thought on loudness meters?
For some submissions, we've run it through tools that allow us to get what LUFS meter, to meter them for LUFS. They haven't been Final Cut. Usually we're looking at peaks. It's in Final Cut as opposed to LUFS. I think it would be useful to have, a LUFS meter for it, because there are rules for submission to almost every platform that you have to put out. So for those of us putting stuff on YouTube, it's basically peak at -1. Or zero. Like have the peak just plow into it, on YouTube is how we make our videos. We don't worry about LUFS. We just worry about maximum so that people don't complain about the audio being low, because that's the #1 complaint you get. And so we just all we worry about is normalizing to -1 all the way across the thing. When we start submitting things to Netflix, when we start submitting things to Apple TV, when you start submitting things to things like that, now they have guidelines of it's -14 LUFS or -18 LUFS or -24 LUFS, or and you can tell the difference because go to Apple trailers and listen to some trailers. That has literally it's a peak of 0. Now go back to the movies on your Apple TV or to Netflix, and everything will be a solid 10 dB less than it was on trailers. And so it's a different. What you're experiencing there is a different set of rules. Go ahead, Bill.
I have to deliver into broadcast a lot, and everything that I do into that thing goes through a LUFS control system. I use the Klangfreund meters. It's spelled KLANGFREUND. They have a LUFS suite that will not only show you exactly where your content is, but you can set it to -24, as I have to for the NBC affiliates, and then other standards for other deliveries. And that, in conjunction with roles, lets me build a list of things. And with one click, I can output all my different audio levels things in one click for all the deliveries I normally do.
Next question.
Ant Pruitt in San Francisco says, beyond the Pelican case, what are your most reliable cases for transporting AV equipment, or is Pelican becoming a standard? Thanks.
Go ahead. Stuart.
Pelican's not becoming the standard. That happened quite a while ago. But for alternatives to Pelicans, for those who are budget limited, toolboxes full with foam. Why? Because they have handles and wheels, and they fit in a car boot.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
For my first Pelican case, I actually used those carbon fiber suitcases, which was probably not the best thing in the world to do. But yeah, I put them with clothes and foam and things like that. This one right here is right before pandemic. I was using this a lot. This is from SKB. It's a component rack case. It's got a 2U in it. And of course, you can put a laptop on top. The best part about this case is I can take it on the plane with me as a regular carry-on. So, and if I did have to check it underneath a plane, I have a special fabric double clip that I can clip around to make sure that the panels don't fall off. But the clips are pretty good to keep everything together, and it holds pretty well. And it's got, of course, rollers, so you can roll around the airport easy.
I think the #1 reason we don't use those, we did get some of them, but we don't use them for flying, is that they're not built, they don't have shock mounts. So if you check them, regardless of whether the front and back fall off, if you've ever watched, I take video of people putting our cases into the plane, that I send to our the folks that are packing the stuff of just, I would like to remind you what they're going to do to it. And you see someone just throwing it, and you just have to remember that can it drop off your desk at 4 feet and still everything inside be okay? And usually that's the question I have. Doug?
Yeah, I just shipped Jeff Keithley a bunch of expensive gears in a Pelican case. And that's what I would just shipping wise. But another alternative, Harbor Freight has a line called Apache that looks just like Pelican. I have a ton of those, but I don't know if I would ship those or not. So
yeah, go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, Seahorse cases is kind of if it's going to be in the back of a truck moving around, Seahorse cases are a good kind of lower cost option to Pelican. One of the big benefits to Pelican is the third-party people that make third-party pieces for them as far as inserts and things like that. Everybody's got CADs for them. They can build you whatever you need internally. So that's for small things. For large things, we typically go with a case by somebody like L&M, something that's like a true road case.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I was going to say, when we originally designed teleprompters, which had CRTs in them, so you had like a 30-pound delicate monitor and a piece of prompter glass, we used custom A&S cases, and these are plywood and laminate type cases, and they're all custom built. This is from Encore, and you can have them built to any shape or size, and they generally hold up for road cases. Of course, putting them on an airplane is something else. They weigh more, and you usually have to ship them air freight or by truck.
Yeah, for us, I mean, I probably owned a couple hundred Pelicans at one point. I mean, of all different sizes, mostly 1650s and 1510s. Those are the ones that we had the most of the carry-on. Now, the places where we went the other way is when we're close to 70 pounds. We would and we're using something regularly, we would use Thermodyne. So you have custom inserts built and Thermodyne makes them for you. And the case itself is much lighter, about 30% lighter than a Pelican case. And so you can get more weight in under 70 pounds if you're trying to fly with things. And then the other place that we did it is we would use Toomey cases that we would retrofit to get, these are carry-on cases that we would retrofit for countries that are non-carné, so that we could wander in with something that when you go into a Pelican, you bring a Pelican case into another country, they immediately assume that you're bringing gear. So sometimes we didn't want that assumption. So that would be the Toomeys were what we used for that, which are more expensive than the Pelican cases. Next question.
Ted Claudio in Quezon City in the Philippines says, how would you rate the Behringer Flow 8 as a mixer for small productions? I'm okay with the number of inputs, outputs. It's just about its practicality for live streaming due to some controls, which can be only set on the Bluetooth app.
Go ahead, Leo.
Hopefully I'm going to not crash out here. Okay. So yes, there are some certain things you can only set in the app, but actually that's, in my view, to the advantage, because you actually set them up in advance, you get it ready, and then you use it during the actual production. I think it's a really great mixer for certain environments with the number of channels it has. And it also works as really well as an interface where you're going to somewhere where they've already got a massive mixer in the location, and you just want to connect in so that you want to use it as an interface, because you can push things in and out the way you want to do it. But going further than that, if you really want to go the next stage up, it's the XR18. It would be the next thing I would go to. And I think I'm going to give up because I'm now so drifting out.
I still hear you just fine. It's all good. Next question.
Next question comes from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. A Zoom events license for 500 attendees is currently only $20 per month US, more than a Zoom webinar license of the same size. Would anyone buying in now go only for webinar?
I just have to play with the events. I'm not sure what the events add that I want. I think that's the thing that I haven't really dug into enough. I think I have to go to some of these before I look at it. I think the problem for a lot of us is that Zoom took our 500 person license of webinar and increased it to 1,000. So after a year, a lot of us got bumped to 1,000. So me leaving my webinar license for a events license would actually be downgrading. So I think it's an interesting problem for some folks. I'm sure that Zoom can figure that out from a business perspective, but it's interesting. Go ahead, Sky.
I'm pursuing it as a paywall opportunity and a way to figure out how to monetize events and keeping the the trust value that Zoom already has as a one-click option. So that's what I'm exploring, either on Zoom and or Zoom events. So that's how I'm trying to pursue it.
Go ahead, Serge.
I'm not sure that it's a downgrade, because the way they explained it during the meeting, it was including everything that the webinar or anything else included.
No, what I'm saying downgrade is that if I went to webinar events, I would actually get a 500 for $20 more, but I have 1,000 webinar that I'm paying for 500. So the problem is that I have a different class because they upgraded us. It's put them in a position of complexity. It's not you're right that you're not downgrading, you're getting everything, but I don't think I would get my 1,000 if I changed my account. That's the problem. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not, when I say downgrade, it just means that I'm downgrading the number of people that I can absorb. And you're muted. I can't hear you. Serge, I can't hear you.
For any organization that did not buy in yet, I think event will be the default one then.
No, I agree with you. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, that jump is pretty significant too. When you go to 1,000 now, it's 90. Let me see. So 500 was just the 90. Come on, click.
Yep.
I'm not sure why it's not going, but anyways, it's for 1,000 now. It's 340 and 440. Yep. And here's all the things that you get. You do get the networking, and you do get the multi-session, so you could do tracks simultaneously. So those are some of the things that you get.
Sorry. Next question.
Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina is up next with what kind of creative mounts are people using to keep their small webcams in just the perfect spot? Looking to arrange a Brio just below the top of my computer monitor.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So I have my Brio and my prompter now, but before I had that, I did have it tipped just down in front of the top lip of my monitor. And the key to the operation there was this bracket. It is a kind of 90-degree quarter-20 thing. It allows you to mount the Brio from the bottom, on the bottom part of that bracket, and then just mount that bracket somehow up above your monitor. I did that with a combination like a magic arm down to my VESA mount, a super clamp, and then a swivel onto that. I reversed that nut at the top there so it pointed backwards, and that allowed me to mount the Brio there with a very low profile quarter-20 screw coming in from the bottom. I found it helps if you can get a black screw, and it just makes it a little bit more inconspicuous. And then also key to that is that bracket sits in the center of the Brio, which unfortunately is exactly where the cable comes out. But I replaced the cable with one that has a 90-degree USB-C connector on the back. That allows you to slip that cable in there without fouling that bracket. And I'll put some links in Mukana.
Go ahead, Chris.
This might be slightly awkward, but this is the Brio that I'm speaking to everybody on. And if you take this thing, and I'm going to switch to yet another camera here. So there's the Brio, and I'm going to use the built-in FaceTime camera here for a second. And if you take this thing, what most people don't realize is if you just crank that thing off, you get a quarter-20 on the bottom of it. And that makes it very easy to
it's scary the first time you do it. You feel like you're going to rip the thing up in half.
I will also say, if you break your Brio, I apologize.
Like when you pull it apart, you're like, "There's no way this is the way to do this." And yeah, it is. Just pull it apart.
Yeah, it's super awkward.
Yeah, Jeff.
I've already posted it in Mukana, but there's a friend of mine, a client that created PlexiCam, and it is a plastic PVC type of hook, I guess, for lack of a better word. Plexicam.com, and it's really ingenious and see-through, so it's not in the way necessarily, but yeah, Jeffrey's got it up on the website there, and it's worth the money for me. I don't use it.
It looks pretty cool,
but it is a pretty good solution for those smaller cameras.
The one of the other things that I use a lot is the newer arms with little clamps are great. I have lots of them, a box full of them. These little arms, they're like $11 each, and they don't really work with any kind of weight, but with webcams, they work great. And they have little clamps, and they have I just don't have one. Ironically, I don't have one within arm's reach at the moment, but they're great for just kind of, I want to put a monitor over here. I want to hang a little camera or something else over there. It works really well. Next question.
Ted Claudio of Quezon City in the Philippines is back. This time he says, any suggested budget but reliable video player for the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO workflow, aside from the hyperdecks that can be controlled by companion?
The one that, go ahead, Tucker.
Playout B.
Yes, so Playout B is coming up to speed pretty quickly, and it is, I've played it for days, played the Playout B for days, and the developer is part of our community, so it's easy to get a hold of them, get a hold of Jonas. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, and on the Playout B, one of the cool things is it acts essentially like a hyperdeck, so you're able to use your ATEM software control to control them. And I've actually gone out and got a kind of a rack enclosure, so you can put multiple Playout Bs together. It's pretty slick.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Stan Chan in Roseville, California says, thoughts on picking up an Avid Carbon, which includes a free Pro Tools Ultimate Perpetual license. Does everyone normally have a subscription to Pro Tools? Is the bundle a good deal?
I don't know if we have the right people here to answer that question. But if you see Mickey in the after hours, he's the person to ping about the Pro Tools. Most people I know now have a subscription to Pro Tools. I know I do, so I turn it on and off, so as needed. So, but that's kind of the process there. Next question.
Comes from Ted Claudio in Quezon City, the Philippines again. What camera would you recommend to a travel vlogger as a lone portable device to capture his or her trip that's easy to edit and gives you more unique footage than normal? This will be supplemented by a GoPro for extreme water stuff.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, the easy to edit part, I think the consensus is pretty much a Sony or Canon small mirrorless. For the more unique footage, you could grab a Ryko Theta, which is a 360 camera that mounts on a stick or a boom arm. And of course, I would never suggest finding the cheap standard definition version of a Kodak 360 camera and removing the lens and mounting it on a GoPro. I would never suggest that at all because that lens is just too expensive to buy by itself.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So this is the DJI Osmo, the second generation of the DJI Osmo or DJI Pocket. Now it's not called Osmo, and it's also got the little selfie stick that has the joystick on the bottom. It's great for a lot of travel stuff. I use this in South Korea a lot. Also, I don't use the Theta. I use the Insta360 because the Insta360 comes with software that allows you to edit not only in the 360 realm, but also edit as an HD video. So you can use it, move it around, and then create a nice 1080p video off of that. That goes up to 5 point, I don't know, the newer version I think goes past 5K, but you can check out the newer version. That just came out last year.
For me, I take my travel stuff when I'm traveling. When I used to do that a lot, it was a GoPro, one of the Blackmagic cameras at this. I mean, when we started getting the 6Ks, and my phone. the iPhone is a pretty good production tool, especially with an Osmo. Although I still take umbrage on the fact that I have to register with DJI to get my Osmo to work, but it still runs better than most of the other ones I've tested so far. All right, next let's jump. We're going to change direction here. We're now moving to our second hour. By the way, for some of you, I pushed your questions back. As we get to the bottom of the hour, we're going to kind of have to fold those all back, but they all got pushed back into your notes, so you can bring them up tomorrow or another day. So those have all been pushed back from as we move to the next hour. So we're changing direction, and we've got a lot of answers for the first one. So what we're talking about here is mic placement. So while mics are important, where you put them becomes important as well. So we're going to jump straight into the Q&A. We'll have some probably theory that we can talk about a little bit as we move forward. But let's go ahead and jump into the questions. First question.
Okay, our first one comes from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. If really needing to keep the mic out of the frame with a shotgun mic, for example, is it always best to come down from above? And at what angle works best, 45 degrees or what?
Go ahead, Stuart.
The down from above rule comes in from using it on a boom on film sets. Generally, you have it pointing downwards so that if you're outdoors, you don't pick up all the atmospheric noise from cars going past or whatever. In an indoor environment, like for doing this, it's not so critical for it to be pointing up or down, but have it so that anything that is away from it or in the direction that it's listening to isn't things like air conditioning, fans, computers. Pointing down at a carpeted floor is probably still a good idea.
Go ahead, Chris.
You know, I'll never forget a friend of mine, Jeff, was asking me to help him mic a snare drum. And I sat there with the drummer, you know, auditioning one crack at a time for like 10 minutes while I was moving the mic, you know, less than half an inch this way, up, down, in, out. And it's really important to know that it's almost impossible to just say the mic should be here. Every voice is different. Every mic is different. Every room is different. You really have to play with it. You really have to adjust it. So get the help it takes. And maybe you can just wear your headphones and just get it, you know, but you're going to have to really listen to it critically.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So for me, bear with me for this little analogy, but you know those sprinkler like gun kind of controls where if you push in the handle just a little bit, it sprays out really wide. If you push it in tight, it sends a wider thing out. When I'm thinking about mic patterns, I think about that, but in both directions from the mic. If something like a quote shotgun mic, which is I think the worst named thing in the world, its pattern is relatively tight, but a lot of hypercardioids had that out the front and out the back. Only certain mics have a complete front kind of and don't pick up from the back. So thinking about that water thing, when I hang a mic, I'm always looking at both what's in front of it and what's behind it, which in something like a desk situation can be critical because if you have a computer with loud fans directly behind it and you're speaking into a mic that has a low bar pattern out the back, you're going to get a lot of computer fan that you don't want. So you have to understand the pattern and then place the mic so that its entire pickup pattern is taken into consideration.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'd say to trust your ears, but one of the reasons to go overhead is because you don't want the person touching the mic if it's in front of them down below. If you're out on a carpeted floor, as Stuart was saying, you're going to pick up less handling noise from air conditionings and things like that. But use the pattern on if you're using a shotgun mic, use the pattern because it does reject from the sides. So, and you'll hear it as you start to turn. You'll notice where the high frequencies, and that's what provides the detail in your voice, is being rejected. So as you start to come on axis, you'll start to hear that little timbre and those little nuances. But I like to point also at the chest because that's where a large portion of the lower bassy sounds do come out. A lot of your voice comes from your chest. So I like to go overhead and at an angle towards the chest, but passing the mouth along the way.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I agree with a lot of what was said by Bill and Guy there, that you got to think of the pattern. For sound-wise, for a show like this, putting a microphone from underneath can be problematic because if you've got like a 416, getting this out of the shot and out of the way of your keyboard can be problematic. So that's why a lot of people go overhead. I, however, tend to think that this directional microphone works a lot better underneath because I'm of the opinion that the resonance from your sinuses and your chest comes out your nose. That sound comes out your nose because you can tell when you hold your nose, you sound different. And if you're overhead, you miss a lot of that resonance that's shooting down out of your nose, as disgusting as that sounds. But so I think you get a richer sound underneath than overhead.
For some reason, I just want to walk up to someone and say, do you need a handkerchief? You got a lot of resonance coming out of your nose. I just want to let you know. I just want to say it privately. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and going back to what the Stuart was mentioning, bear in mind that since these are very directional microphones, it not only picks up what you're pointing at, but to an extent what is behind it. So if you're using a boom microphone, a shotgun microphone traditionally on a pole, and you're swinging it around, if you are pointing in at an angle, pointing out at an angle, as you move the pole around, it's going to pick up different background noises. But if you are pointing directly down, it's going to primarily stay the same. So that's one of the tools of or features of a shotgun. It's highly directional. But if you're using it in a situation where like it's a sit-down interview or say for a Zoom meeting, I would watch the talent or the subject and see how they move naturally and see if they move a lot or if they're usually steady as they speak. But if I'm not sure, I'll usually place the microphone roughly above their knees and point it at an angle towards their chest. So that gives me a little leeway if they lean forward.
That's perfect. Next question.
Moving on, James Brooks is up next from New York City, and he says, what was the placement and types of mics used on the Belfast projects, and how do they differ from the normal in-studio recording locations?
What mics were used in Belfast? I think that Todd uses an SM7B, I believe, for singing, and he's got a lot of different mics. I think he has a DPA mic for his violin, I believe, and then he has a headset. He has a bunch of different mics, but I don't know what was used in Belfast for that. Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Sorry, I didn't click.
No, you're used to it.
For the first for Todd's first round of the Belfast project, on his violin he used the pickup, but we're exploring other methods for that.
Next question.
Next one comes from Danny Law in Malaysia, and Danny says, "What if you have only one mic to mic the kick drum in a drum kit? Where would you place the kick drum mic and why?"
Go ahead, Chris.
My preference for kick drum is the Beta 52. And it's important to remember that a kick drum makes 3 different distinct noises. There's the slap of the hammer on the skin. There's the kind of air leaving the drum, and then there's the resonance. I prefer the of the air and the resonance, and so you can kind of gate out the hammer if you want. Now, sometimes the hammer sounds great, so you don't want to, but it's those 3 noises that you're trying to get. Also, if you get rid of the initial impact, you can get a very deep sound from a smaller speaker system if you're doing live.
Go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, I mean, everything that Chris said is absolutely correct. And also, you have to know what kind of music you're working with, because I mean, it's going to be completely different if it's jazz versus heavy rock versus those different things. Typically, with specifically with that microphone, if there's a hole in the drum, then there's a little blue line around that microphone, and right even with the drum head, where it won't make contact with anything else, and then you can basically play with it from that location. That's one of the easiest to place microphones for kick drum. But yeah.
And Stuart?
I'm going to answer the question as written, and then I'm going to tell you why. And I would place the kick drum on the drum riser or on a stage. And the reason why is that volume below the drum affects the way the drum sounds, and you want the microphones mounted off of the drum risers so that they're not vibrating around as the riser and the drum moves. That changes the resonance that Chris was talking about. It changes the bass note, and it can change the way the music feels when you're listening to it.
Next question.
Rupert McRae from Dallas, Texas is back up with what is the best placement for mics when not in use? Where and how do you store your mics?
Courtney?
Depends on how long it's going to be between use. If it's a production mic and it works, once or twice a week, I keep it in a basket windscreen and a shock mount, and then put that into a Pelican case, so that way it's doubly protected. But if it's a mic I only use once a year or something, I put it back in the wooden case that it came from. I take it out of the shock mount, because as you can see, this one's been stored incorrectly, and the elastic gives out after a while, and then your microphone will be hitting against hard surfaces as it bounces around in the case. So if you're not going to use it for a long period of time, put it in the hard case and take it out of its shock mount. That takes the stress off the shock mount and doesn't stretch out the elastic if it's an elastic or rubber shock mount. And remember that the foam windscreens can decay from oxygen. So if you put them in a plastic bag or something, keeps oxygen off them, they'll last a little bit longer and keep them from turning into powder or goo.
Neither which are good. Bill?
I wish I could show you some of my old Sennheiser 421 mic boxes where the entire foam inside has degenerated into schmutz. I try to keep them in the original boxes since I just got this 416. They come with, and I don't know if the lights are going to, absolutely custom case for that. They're mostly plastic now. On the upper end mics, you also kind of nice you get a polar pattern from the factory that tells you exactly the response of that mic in that circumstance. And if you learn how to read those can be really useful. So keep them in something, protect your investments. Microphones can be one of the best investments you'll make, and you can sell them at the end of your career for almost what you bought for them if they're good mics, sometimes way more than you paid for them.
For some reason recently, I've been playing with a lot of AR stuff. I really want an AR version of all the mics with their polar patterns. And then I was thinking it'd be really cool if you could snap them to if they could, snap to a mic. So you have a mic up and it would just show the polar pattern. Like, this is what you're going to, with
that's
your phone.
awesome.
You can just look at it. It works in my head. Anyway, next, go ahead, Chris.
This is where my mic is during office hours. And then I do that. There's my mic storage solution.
There we go. Next question.
Next question, moving on to Jasmine Lee. And Jasmine asks, and from Singapore, are there any homemade solutions that presenters can use to prevent the inline microphones of wired headphones from moving or picking up the sound of it brushing against clothing?
Go ahead, Mickey.
One thing you want to try to avoid is having the mic tugged by the talent's movement, or the headset being tugged by the talent's movement. So you want to add some slack to the cable so that it's not moving around with each movement. You can use a strip of transport, a couple of inches, medical tape, a couple of inches below the microphone piece of the headset, so that it has some slack and it's not always shifting around. You can also use a hairpin or one of those snappy hair clips as well on the clothing.
Bill?
Look up the words sticky triangle too. There's an old classic, I'm having too much rubbing off of a dress or something like that. You can take about 3 inches of gaffer's tape, fold it into a triangle thing, make a little pocket, put that around the head of a lav or a small microphone. And if you just search on sticky triangle, you'll see step-by-step instructions on how to make them. That can help if you're getting some rubbing and you don't have a way to get more complicated with your solution.
Next question.
Ted Claudio in Quezon City, Philippines says, with a Rode PSA type of mic arm, any suggested placement configurations with the Shure MV7 that does not obstruct the face?
So there's the two that we're kind of leaning, a bunch of us are leaning towards. I use this is an OC white. I was going to say EB white. That would be a really funny mic stand. Anyway, so an OC white Ultima, which is an underslung mic stand, not an overslung one. Another entry into this market is the Elgato makes now an underslung mic that is considerably less expensive with about two less joints. So I don't know whether it's more. I'd have to have it there to see if it makes any difference. There's a couple of extra joints. There's a lot of joints on the OC white one. Although there'd be a lot of interesting words if it was an EB white. It would be probably incomplete and very sparse, but effective. Anyway, next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next with, what are some in-car microphone options that are not head-worn or Bluetooth hands-free options? I've seen lavs pointed down from the sun visor, for example.
Go ahead, Chris.
First of all, Rupert, do you mean for live, or like if you're in a production and you're trying to get the best audio for a film or a TV shoot?
I mean, I guess either one. My primary was, just to get the for better results, in car, for live, for Zoom, for example.
I've been really pleased, and other people have commented that the Bluetooth in my new truck sounds great. I was watching one of the carpool karaoke episodes where, what's his name, the comedy monkey who was on
Seinfeld.
TV. Yeah, well, no, he's doing the thing, but he had chili peppers on, and so for one of the songs, they all took their shirts off, and I was shocked that they had lavs taped to their chest. And we've always just snuck a lav into the visor, but I was really shocked to see that they had lavs taped to the chest. I think the visor is a good solution.
All right, go ahead, Stuart.
Oh, this is a complex question. If you're doing filmmaking and you have an Alex budget, you book a place that you can do a proper green screen or like the volume style thing. You take the windscreen out of the car and you get your audio person to point the microphone in through that big hole where the wind, and then you digitally replace the windscreen. That gets you perfect audio for dialogue. If you want to see journalistic style stuff, have a look for some of the behind the scenes from Top Gear. Go back about 5 to 6 years for where the hosts actually speak English because it's easy to understand, before they went to another channel. But you'll see microphones mounted on the dashboard. The other thing is, Chris mentioned one of the most important ways a microphone is mounted in a car, and that is done by the automotive manufacturer with the Bluetooth connection. If you can access that to record your sound, they spend millions upon millions of dollars in the development of every automobile to position the microphones for that service so you get the best possible sound, and that is the best possible place in that noisy environment to put a microphone.
Go ahead, Bill.
So a car is actually a decent sound environment, and witness that as I've done a lot of voiceovers where I haven't had any booth available, so I've gone out to a car in the parking lot, particularly at night if there's no traffic around, and so it's going to seal you away from environmental noise pretty well. And most Omnis, if you can get them in front of the person, even little lavaliers, can sound really good in a car environment. I wouldn't do it when the car is actually in operation and traffic and things like that, but still, if you roll up all the windows and keep the air conditioning off and can stand that for a period of time, you can get decent audio out of most car environments.
Go ahead, Courtney.
On the visor is a typical go-to if you can keep it out of the shot. If the car is moving, try and keep the windows rolled up because wind noise will be a major problem in a moving car. For a really high quality, we use Sept's Colette cable, which is an active cable like that you can plug a Sept's capsule into, and it will give you a very high quality microphone with a very low profile, and you can kind of tape that up onto the visor and get a really good quality recording inside a non-moving car or a car with the windows up.
Sorry, I got no wrong window there, Guy.
Yeah, there's a model that's from DPA called the 4097, and it's a little mini shotgun, and you can put that also up in the visor, and here it is shown on Electrosonics SSM little mini transmitter.
In some productions that we've been involved with are using the 4097s in the car. So that has achieved relatively good. I mean, compared to everything else, it's pretty darn good quality. Next question.
Our Aunt Pruitt from San Francisco says, noob here, I have to use the PR40 most of you have, but my voice sounds richer when it's directly in front of me versus how Mr. Lindsay sounds rich with the placement below him. Is this due to my posture, voice, or what?
I don't know. I mean, I know Ant. Ant's got a great voice. So I think that, I think that it's, I don't know why that would be the case. I mean, I don't know if there's that much difference. I mean, I guess it's different. I mean, if I turn this way, you're going to hear a fair bit different that you may like better. I don't want to talk into it that way. I think so. I've decided to, as this mic moves away from you, you start to, have a different flavor of voice, and definitely your attack is going to change. And I think it's probably has more to do with how it sounds for you. Knowing Ant, I think that it'd be hard to have your voice not sound good. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've heard Ant. Ant's been on here, and I think he has a fabulous voice. If you want something richer, I mean, the tools of the trade, proximity and getting closer to the element will add a little depth to it. Make sure you have a clean recording chain so there's no background noise, so that if you want to apply compression or things like that to make things sound bigger, you're not compressing both the voice and room air conditioning or something that you don't want, because that is very difficult to do. But generally, those things, plus just do a lot of voiceover. Your muscles do get stronger. Your diaphragm, the muscles that control your lungs, all of them build over time. So the more you do, the more resonance and the better you'll be.
Yep. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and the PR40 especially, and a lot of moving coil dynamic microphones, you got to realize they have a little cylinder in there that has a coil wrapped around it, and that moves back and forth within a magnet. And it moves, perpendicular to the end of the microphone. So when you put it directly in front of your mouth, all the sound pressure coming out of your mouth is going right in the direction of movement of that coil, and that's where you'll get the maximum amount of sound pressure versus background pressure. So you get the most resonant sound out of it. If you move it off to the side, then the sound, you're getting the edges of the sound pressure coming out of your mouth as versus in front. You will have more of a problem with plosives, of course. That's why Alex has the nice little pop filter in front.
I have a pop filter. I have a pop filter, and I'm speaking across it. And I do think that now that Ant has brought it up, I do think I sound better this way. But I won't. But I'm making the decision to not do it that way because I'm making a compromise. But I now feel like I need to talk like this. So yeah, okay, Ant. Okay, let's go to the. Yeah, let's go to the next question.
Would do very
Definition of AM or FM.
Anyway, go ahead. Next question.
Moving to Samuel Norvik in Norway. He says, what's a good alternative to a lav mic if the talent refuses to wear a headset mic?
And we have nobody raising their hand. Go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, I mean, if the option is lav or headset, then the headset's the preference, obviously. But you're saying they'll refuse to wear a headset, and it sounds like your preference would be to not use a lav. A handheld's going to be kind of your next option, or some kind of a boom or something like that. It depends on if it's a live environment or not. I would say shotgun, then handheld.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. And Tucker said, if you get a good shotgun like they do on Hollywood sets and can move it just an inch out of frame, some of the really good shotguns, the Septs and the other high-end things, can sound fabulous. They also sound very natural because you do get a little bit of the room with it as opposed to the very close voiceover mic of being right in front of a large diaphragm condenser.
There are a couple other, there's a couple other options that you can think about. Other ones that we've used are Countrymen, and we've actually inserted them into their collars, or hid them underneath. They're not going to sound as, you have a high probability of some rustling, and there's a lot of other things, but we have hidden it because the talent doesn't want to use it. We've used a couple of the DPAs and simply attached them right below, and I can't think of, I want to say a 4066, but I can't, or maybe a 60. Anyway, I have them sitting over here, but I don't. Anyway, we clip them underneath, and we've actually even putting holes in their t-shirt. Some people not only want lavs, but they want t-shirts, and they've been willing to give us a hole because they want us to run the wire through it, and so so that it's really like just sitting there. So some people do get kind of touchy when it comes to replacing the functionality, and then the 150s, the Shure 150 lavs are pretty good. When it comes to replacing the functionality of the headset mic, one of the other ones that we use is a Shure WL 185, 184. I can't remember 184, 185. There's two different ones, and they're very different. I just can't think of them. I haven't had to put them on for so long. One is cardioid, one is supercardioid, and it's the cardioid that you want. Anyway, those have a lot of off-axis rejection. The real danger is if they fall sideways, you're done. Like literally, if they pull on their jacket and those things go like 15 degrees or 30 degrees, you can barely hear them. But if you get it on and glue it with super glue to their nice leather vests, it'll work great. So anyway, so that's those are other ones to consider. Go ahead, real quick, Bill. It really helps for folks to get ahead on these answers. So go ahead, Bill, and then Guy, and then Courtney, real quick.
Yeah, if you want to do a t-shirt, there's another thing. There's a mic company called Tram that made very popular microphones, and they had a thing called the vampire clip. It's a little clip that holds the mic body and has two little pins out of it. Fabulous for putting inside sport coats, t-shirts, and things like that. So there's all sorts of mic rigging.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, just as important as feeding a return into the talent's ear if they're inexperienced, having them cue the mic and be off access can be disastrous. So if you feed them back, even with some road goes, with some kind of in-ears, then they can hear what they're doing. That can be more important than any mic, is just having it placed properly.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And it depends on your situation. If you're in a situation where there's live PA, of course, a lavalier or something where you can get the microphone closer to the person is going to be necessary. Almost all sitcoms and television shows use this microphone, the 416, overhead on booms, operated by boom operators. So if you don't have PA, you don't have to deal with that. You can get a perfectly good sound out of that type of situation without having to mount anything on the actor.
Next question.
Ted Claudio, back from Quezon City in the Philippines, says, how do you place your dynamic mic in relation to your monitor speakers for the host or panelist to avoid feedback or doubling in the audio mix? And can this be done for condenser mics or lapel mics as well?
Go ahead, Mickey.
If this is for a live situation, then have the null of the microphone, usually the back end of the mic, pointed towards the monitor wedges. But if this is for a broadcast situation, in ears, there's no need to have open speakers in the room.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, the last half of Mickey's answer was what I was going to say, but I was going to say it snarky.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas asks the question, when is the stereo microphone appropriate for dialogue?
Go ahead, Mickey.
So the thing with stereo microphones, most of them aren't designed to capture dialogue or speech. But you can treat the stereo microphones as two mono feeds instead. But do know that most of these don't have good reach. So your presenters have to be quite close to each other. Might be quite uncomfortable.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I agree with Mickey. Most stereo microphones are used for capturing ambience sound effects and should not be used for dialogue. You want to keep as much isolation between the two people doing dialogue as you can so that they can cut them apart later and use the close-up from one person and the close-up from the other person shot at a different time. And if they overlap with a stereo microphone, it's tougher to cut those apart.
Next question.
Ted Claudio in Quezon City, Philippines, back with any tips on mic placement and where do you place the grills of a Deity S-Mic 2S shotgun to minimize background noise and room echo-ness for a small untreated room?
Go ahead, Mickey.
So those grills on a shotgun microphone are called it's called the interference tube. That's what allows noise to be canceled from the sides. You want those to be pointed towards the, of course, like if it's hanging from above, pointed towards the sides or the extraneous noise sources, so that those can be canceled off by the microphone. But just to add, you really want to try to avoid shotgun microphones in an indoor location, especially a smaller untreated location, because the reflections bouncing off the walls, which is also the voice itself, the reflection of the voice, will go into the interference tubes and start to cancel out the voice.
What would you use instead?
Hypercardioid might work better in an indoor location because it doesn't have the interference tube design, but it still maintains quite a good amount of directionality.
Next question.
Moving on, we have Robert Soji of Los Angeles, and Robert asks, any tips for mic placement for voiceover recordings?
No, I don't, but nobody here does voiceovers. If only we had somebody here that did voiceovers. Go ahead, Courtney.
Typically overhead and separated from anything like a desk or that you're working off with your script on. You want to cover, if you have a music stand to hold your script, you want to cover it with a non-reflective surface like a carpet, something like that, to keep the sound from pinging off that into the voiceover microphone. I like voiceover mics placed underneath, but that can become problematic if you have to see a script and you're looking down. So usually they're overhead on a boom arm, just, within about 8 to 10 inches. It depends on the characteristic of the voice you want to record. If you're recording a voiceover that's supposed to lay into a regular scene shot in a wide location or an outdoor location, you don't want it too close because it'll sound unnatural in the environment that it's in. So you want to kind of adjust the mic placement depending upon what it's going to go over. If it's supposed to be a godlike voice, and you want it close. If it's supposed to be someone else in the room, then you don't want to get it too close to them.
Go ahead, Bill.
All of the things that Courtney said. Voiceover is a weird thing because, the traditional voiceover comes from an absolute null environment. You're going into a voice booth mostly that is perfectly treated to avoid all reflections. You want a little bit of clarity, and but there can't be anything else around it. And the reason for that is that when it gets into the studio, you want the engineer to be able to apply compression or anything else and increase or mess with the voice itself and nothing around it, no natural sound. So it's a different kind of a thing. And every mic is a little bit different. So everybody I know who does voiceovers, you buy your mic, you put it in the circumstance where you're going to be where you're going to be recording, and you record and listen, record and listen, record and listen, and you apply things like heavy compression to it to see if it pops up something that sounds bad, a room null, some weird thing that's happening, and you just try to get rid of anything that's infecting that sound to make it less than ideal, and then you leave it alone, and that's where you go back to do your voiceovers over and over again. That's kind of the way that pros usually approach this. You want something that's reproducible and controllable, and you can come in and walk in front of your mic and you know exactly how to do your job.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and as Bill said, to walk in front of your mic, that assumes that you're standing. And so I'd be really interested in hearing, since the performance is what we're trying to accomplish here, what Bill Bill's opinion would be about standing versus sitting, because scrunching, slouching, leaning, that stuff is easier when you're in a chair versus the standing concept. So what would you
I'll
say,
just
Bill?
really quickly say that voiceover is, there's different things. There is performance, there is voice acting, there is voiceover for commercials. It used to be that people wanted people to sound like the big monster Orson Welles announcer. Then suddenly that style went away and everybody wanted you to sound like the guy next door. And so there is a certain acting to performance. Performance is probably my number one. Script first, performance second. All the equipment is at least third, because those are the important things that's going to make that message really resonate with an audience. Courtney.
Yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention when talking about perspective, mic perspective, when recording for animation, a lot of times they will record with multiple mics on a single person, one close up, one about 1.5 feet away, so that they can choose a perspective later, because at the time they record the voice, they don't know what kind of shot that if they're going to be in a close up or they're going to be in a wide shot. And that way they can match perspective because they have multiple ISO'd tracks at different distances.
Next question.
Moving on, Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, what tips and tricks do you have for setting up podium or stand mics to accommodate walk-up speakers of different heights in a live environment, trying to avoid awkward moments for the speakers?
Tucker?
Yeah, it really starts with a quality PA that's deployed and tuned by a professional. Because if you have a PA where they have taken into account where the podiums are going to be and where those microphones will be, they will be controlling how much of the PA hits that location. In that case, you can use a short podium mic that allows for different height speakers without adjustment. So that's really good. If you do have to have a podium mic with a longer boom and you do need them to adjust it because you have, both very small people plus basketball players, then you just need to have a prep with them backstage to make sure they know when you first walk up, the mic's going to be muted. You can make the adjustment you need and then carry on, but make sure that you plan that and train it.
The best placement that we've ever used for the events that we've done this with is a well-dressed, public-facing A2. So you know who they are, you know where you've rehearsed it a little bit, and you have someone who understands exactly the mechanics of the mic. And as a person's walking out, and if you watch big events, you're going to see this. You're going to see someone walk out and quietly just go whoop and pull it down. And they've practiced it a bunch of times. They know exactly how much. If it is a mic stand, they know that to loosen, which one to loosen, and they bring it down really quickly, and it happens in a second. And then it's perfect all the time. And when we go to events that we don't have, when we have control, that's how we do it. Is I have a person that's on staff that looks good on the stage, it's dressed well, and they walk up, they make the adjustment, and they do it as the person's walking out, and it's super subtle. No one notices when they're good at it, and no one notices that it worked well. It just happens to be that there's not a mic in their forehead or a mic that's down, in their belly button. And there's, like all of that stuff is just kind of, when you do it well, no one's going to notice, and it just goes away, and it just makes for a smoother event. And that's the hardest part, is you're putting money into something that the client, the audience, no one can see. It's an invisible fix, and it works all the time. Mickey?
If you happen to be in an event that is building the stage, custom building a stage, you can have a motorized boom with a gooseneck mic that can be remotely controlled to go up and down depending on the height of the presenter.
I will admit I worked on an event that had that. I've only seen it once in my entire career. It was magical. It was magical because I was like, who's moving that mic? And because I could see the mic going down, just going down real slowly like this. I was like, who's moving that mic? And they're like, oh, it's motorized. And I was like, where do I get 10 of those? Anyway, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, but when the motor overheats in the middle of the show and it's stuck at their ankle level, then you're in big trouble.
Exactly.
No, I was going to say, best laid plans. You may have an A2 ready to go. That's good. But invariably, the talent will get out there and grab that stock-based microphone and try and bend it, or they will just lean into it and talk like this, and everything goes out the window. So you can place it perfectly, but you can't control an excited talent as to what they're going to do.
The one thing I will say about that, though, is that there is a level of confidence. When you give the talent lots of communication, they tend to relax and not touch things. And you keep on telling them like, hey, we've got it under control. And when a person goes out and adjusts their mic for them, they're much less likely to, grab onto it. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. And he says, I have a wandering talent that won't wear a mic and talks with their hands. What's the best case for using an Omni mic on a podium for them?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, you need three things, and Mickey will probably explain to you how to set up the third one. But omnidirectional mics, as a general rule, they come in two sorts of classes. One will pick up everything in a room, and one is set so it just picks up things that are close, like a SM58 does. Because of that, you've either got to have somebody on top of the mic, or it's going to pick up everything when they move down the podium. The footfalls, the creaks of the stage, everything's going to be hooked up. So the solution for that is either an array of hypercardioid mics hanging from the roof, and Mickey will probably explain to you how to set that up, or a hypercardioid mic on the podium and a nail gun for their shoes.
There you go. That'll work. Go ahead, Mickey.
If this is for a broadcast situation, I would probably hire enough boom ops to cover the entire floor space and have subs for those boom ops to switch out every 30 minutes. And secondly, I would send out a CYA email.
A lot of what I do to handle some of this, we call this wetware development, which is during meetings, I talk about with clients, I often talk about that the audio is the most important thing, and that the, clarity is important, that, people have confidence in you because they can hear it, and that all of those things make a difference. And that all sinks in over time, and so sometimes you can't fix it all at one time, but if someone then goes back and looks at it and they see that it's a little off, oftentimes I find that the behavior changes over time, but not necessarily on the event that you're working on. Go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, it's always difficult whenever you're trying to, you want to make sure that the presenter's comfortable, and if they're comfortable walking and moving without a microphone on, then trying to enable that behavior while still getting what you need out of it. Sometimes that's going to be multiple microphones and Dugan Auto Mixer. Also setting bounds, saying, you can move. Here's some dark tape marks just that aren't really visible to the audience, but that you can see. Just kind of stay inside that zone. That'd be really helpful. Just know if you walk to the edge and look away from where that microphone is, by the way, it's over there, your voice is going to go away. So please, what you're saying is important. Let's make sure that we capture it.
And one of the things that we do talk about, and I use examples a lot of times when I'm talking to talent support or the talent, of the trained people who do this, who really push the outer edge of this, have spikes in the ground of where they're going to say something that matters. And when they're setting that thing up, they might be walking to that spike, but they're going to be standing on that spike. They're going to talk a little bit before they say what matters. And the reason they're going to do that is so that the camera can sit there and zoom in on them and get that moment and capture it for both the iMag and for the live stream. And if they want to make impact, they'll do that. if they if they're going to wander around, the camera's going to stay wide, the audio isn't going to be very good, and they're not making the impact of all the money they're spending on their event and all the time and effort to do all this stuff. They're not making the impact they can make if they manage their ability to walk to a specific place and stand. And it's walking and posting is like the key to the operation. Next question.
Comes from Brody Hafner in New York City. He says the Rode website suggests mounting a lav mic upside down inside the clip to reduce plosives. Is this good advice? I don't ever recall seeing an upside down lav mic.
Go ahead, Stuart.
If our UK-based colleagues were here, they would be pointing out that this is the recommended method for mounting a lav by the BBC. So it's not something that's just out of the ether. They've got very good reasons for it, and they have done it for a long time for exactly that reason.
I was going to say, you've never seen the BBC then, because every BBC host has upside down lavs. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would typically first go for pointing up. But if I do get plosives, issues with plosives, then point it down. It's a simple, very, very quick fix.
Go ahead, Bill.
This is in honor of Courtney, because I have mic'd a lot of people who are nose breathers, and they huff out their noses at regular intervals. And a mic on the chest in regular lav position will get those wind plosives, and in those cases, 100% turn them upside down.
Go ahead, Courtney.
It kind of depends on the lav that you're using. A lot of them, some of them are end address, some of them they're front address, and some of them are front address with a port that wraps around the top edge. So you got to look at your microphone, look at the pickup pattern. If it's omni, then of course you can mount it upside down and it should work fine and alleviate some of the plosive noises. But you're going to get a clearer sound if the element itself has a direct line of sight to the mouth.
I still think you get more paper noise. I think the BBC, I still feel like I can hear the paper for the BBC more because they point them down, but it could be just my imagination. Next question.
Comes from Ted Claudio, and Ted asks, for 3 panelists seated behind a small long table with arm's length distance from each other, how do you place dynamic mics so that you don't have to manually mix up or down for each speaker, since my mixer does not have auto mix?
Go ahead, Bill.
One of the most keys here is that if you have 2 open mics that are equal distance from one speaker, and you're going to go into stereo or go into mono, collapse the signal down, you can get all sorts of phase cancellation. The rule of thumb generally is the distance from the mic to the speaker. The other speaker has to be at least 3 times farther away from that mic to avoid this issue. So multiple mics open can be a problem, but you want to make sure that if you can, space your people and the microphone so that they don't get one person talking into multiple mics.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, if you don't have an auto mixer, I'd probably set up a slight expander or a very, very subtle gate on the microphones. You don't want to drop it too much that you lose any ambience that might be happening. But that would allow you to essentially kind of mimic what an auto mixer does.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I was going to say exactly that. Mickey does point out that it generates kind of like an auto mixer. Get an auto mixer. You have to realize that when you open up multiple microphones at the same time, that mixer adds the sound information from all 3 at an equal level. And so you're going to get 3 times the feedback from if you have open speakers. And so without an auto mix, to take that level down to only 1 microphone's background level instead of 3 microphones background level, you're going to have to deal with feedback, air conditioning noise. Any ambient noise in the room is going to be multiplied times the number of microphones that you have open.
Go ahead, Tucker.
One of the really common themes that has come up today during this session is really talking about mic polar patterns on the microphones, placing the nulls where each other speaker is, and kind of making sure that you have an intentional place for, I'm sitting here, the microphone that's picking me up has a null headed toward the other 2 presenters. That's going to be kind of your best friend in this situation, that and distance to each individual speaker.
And remember that you can get auto mixers. The Dugan auto mixer, for instance, they have hardware outboard of you can do inserts out of your mixer into the Dugan and then have it return those back in. In fact, most of us started that way, where we have analog, or even Dugan actually has a Dante version that you can just put Dante and have it go out and back through it. And it's funny, it's got a lot of channels and it doesn't cost any more than the analog one. I actually asked Dan about that and he's like, well, it doesn't cost any more to make. I thought that was just great. I was like, it's 64 channels of Dugan. Anyway, all right, next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next. How would you match 2 members of talent on stage, one with a lav and one with a headset?
Go ahead, Mickey.
For me, number 1 would be EQ. You can get 90% there with EQ.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next. For recorded content, in what places and with what mics would it be more appropriate to record with noise assist on a mix pre than to remove those noises in post?
Go ahead, Bill.
So first and foremost, it's how quick is your turnaround. I've used actually the Cedar system, which is equivalent to Noise Assist, been around a little bit longer. If I have to record something live and I know I'm going to be in a noisy environment, but I have to get it on the air or to a client super fast, treating that in the field with one of those noise reduction units gives me a clean track that I can take to edit and get sent off quick. If I had time, I would always record both that treated sound and the original, because I will probably be able to do a better job in post of eliminating noise than I will live.
Go ahead, Mickey.
What Bill said.
There you go. And Stuart?
What Bill said, plus one caveat, and that is the guest. If it's a guest that you will never, ever get the chance to meet and record again, and it's a noisy environment, then you might want to risk it. but also do a complete separate recording so that you've got a raw recording that you can take the noise out in post as well.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones is up next with any tricks with mics for recording room tone to be used as fill or maybe to cancel out the sound.
Mickey?
Yeah, for room tone, you want to use the same mics used in for the dialogue, including any lavalier. So don't let the talent walk out. Keep all the lights on because those generate noise as well. And some cameras, high-res camera, also generate a lot of noise. So you want to keep it exactly the same. But if in case Roscoe is talking about recording at ambience, that's not exactly what the tone is. Like for additional backgrounds to cut in and post, that's a different story.
Go ahead, Bill.
The classic reason for room tone, and I'll just go through this very fast. You have a 2-character shoot. You're doing video. You shoot the first character in the morning. You break for lunch. You're going to shoot the other character. And in those 2 times, something has changed radically. An air conditioner that is on in the afternoon was not on in the morning. So the poor editor sits down to cut that scene. And every time he cuts back and forth between his lines and her lines, the air conditioning pops up and pops down. So if you get room tone, which is just the sound of the room, no matter where they are, no matter how it changes, you keep getting room tone. No matter whether you want to cut that scene without it or with it, you can have that overall walla, they call it walla sound, that is consistent to make one sound like the other and make things consistent.
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, everything that Mickey said. I refer to this as audio putty because it's that audio fill that goes in between the different sounds that are coming out from the ambience. And so, yeah, you do want, and if you could please aim the camera at the microphone so that it's just visually for an editor going, oh, that's what this clip is about. Because oftentimes it doesn't get slated. Sometimes, that doesn't get mentioned. So that's helpful to the editor on the back end going, how do I fix this problem?
Thank you.
Yeah, and one trick that you can do, and a lot of directors who have worked as editors know this little trick, is to gather your room tone in small segments at the beginning of each take. In other words, he calls ready and action. And that little 5 seconds in there can be duplicated. There's no dialogue going on. The actors aren't delivering their lines. Nobody's moving. Everybody's quiet. And so it gives you that little chunk of room tone that perfectly matches the take.
Next question.
Well done. Robert Soji is up next from Los Angeles. I see many YouTubers speaking into their mics off axis. Doesn't speak into a mic on axis provide the most natural and accurate sound?
I don't know how many are speaking really off axis, but I don't have a sense of that though. I usually a lot of them are at angle like this. I'm still technically on axis. I'm still talking across the axis of my microphone. If I go over here like this, I get off axis pretty quickly. But if they're doing it, I think that it's probably out of some experience issues. Go ahead, Courtney.
It depends totally on the design of the microphone. If it's an interference tube that Mickey showed you earlier, the frequency response varies with the amount of off axis, especially with a Sennheiser 416, something like that. You get nice clear highs if you're dead on, or if the end of the microphone is pointed directly at the mouth. If you're off 3 or 4, the more off axis you get, the less high end you get, and your sound becomes a little bit muddy. You'll still hear them, but it will be not as clear and as accurate.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
I think I can demo that. So let me just start. But this is a 416 in front of me. So to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. So you can see that my high end is just going away as I get away from the polar pattern of the mic.
Next question.
Dick Brewer is up next. Is there any way to mute volume just for Zoom without affecting the overall volume of the computer?
Go ahead, Mickey.
If you're not routing the audio of Zoom to somewhere else for a different purpose, you can click on the microphone, the little menu on the microphone icon in Zoom, and go leave computer audio.
Next question.
Next one comes from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, and he says, when is an on-off switch on a handheld microphone a good idea, assuming it's mostly a bad idea?
Stuart.
Back in the days of analog audio, when somebody had a mic with a, shall we say, a rather sharp acting switch, you could hear the noise the sound desk operator made when somebody clicked it on and off. So yes, they're a bad idea. But the one place where you would use it now is in an environment where the person speaking has certain security responsibilities, such as in government, and that they may have an assistant needs to talk to them and they need absolute control to make sure that that conversation can't be overheard. That's about the only place that I would allow anyone to have a microphone with a switch on it now.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, I would say the same exact thing. If you're a solo practitioner and you're the only person who is able to mute your mic, then an on-off switch makes sense. Any other times, let the front of house engineer determine whether your mic is live or not, period. End of story.
When we send it to clients for talkback mics, they work great. The switches are great to let them do that, but we don't do it with talent. It's just wait every time the talent turns it off by accident or on purpose and then doesn't turn it back on every time. Like it's like 100%. Next question.
Manolo Lorenzo of the UK says, what is the difference between a voiceover recording with a shock mount versus no shock mount with its key, let's say a Neumann TLM 103? Can we notice it in the final recording?
Go ahead. There's no one's raised their hand. I'll say that you have desk noise that can pick up if you're moving things around is where you might hear some of it, some vibrations that occur. And you guys got to get up further ahead on raising your hand. Courtney?
Yeah, what you said. If there's anything that the person can touch that is connected in any way mechanically to the microphone, you need to be in a shock mount. And that's really the only difference. It shouldn't affect the audio quality in a shock mount other than not in a shock mount unless there's something resonating in the support for that microphone.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill, real quick.
I'm going to tap my mic arm because I haven't set this up with a shock mount.
Yeah.
You should be able to hear lots of stuff. And as a matter of fact, the resonance out of this mic arm is unbelievable. It takes about 3 seconds to go away.
Next question.
Andrew Lipnick of San Francisco says, please discuss how the distance from mic to mouth when using lav mics with a PA system can increase or decrease gain before feedback.
Go ahead, Stuart.
That answer I gave before about having omnidirectional microphones, a lav is in many cases close to omnidirectional. The closer it is to the mouth, the less level you need out of it. So the louder your speakers can be and still not be picked up by the microphone. That's what it is. It's just a ratio of the volume that it can hear versus the volume that you're putting into the room.
Bill, real quick.
I completely forgot my answer. I was trying to do three things at once. So
next question.
I'm going to pass. Next question comes from Walt Palmer in Rebelith Beach, Delaware. And he says, I have a small radio production studio with a carpeted walls and floor, but a big honking piece of glass about 3 feet from the back of the microphone. I use either a shotgun or an RE20. Can anyone suggest a better mic to reject the glass bounce?
Go ahead, Bill.
Look at the polar patterns of mics that they give you. Here's a series of polar patterns that I just grabbed off the internet. You will see, particularly on that supercardioid mic, a lobe coming off the back of the mic. So whatever mic you get, whatever mic you have, look up its polar pattern, see how much sensitivity it has from behind the mic, and try to find a mic type and a specific mic that has as little back, has the maximum back rejection. That'll help.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Simple fix. Get the microphone further away from the glass or turn your position at an angle from the glass. Work with physics.
Or change the angle of the glass. I mean, so one of the things that we've done with some of these is we've actually put another piece of glass on the inside and tilted it up so that it just it reflects the audio upward. And so, because we had a client that didn't want to take the glass out, we're like, why don't we use a camera? Like, glass is a very old, it's what you did before you had GoPros, as far as I'm concerned. And so, so the glass is not something that helps us anymore. But what we did is we took the glass and we put another piece of glass on the inside, which also added insulation, but turned it all up and pushed that audio up. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, the Earthworks Icon Pro does not have a foam windscreen. How do you keep the mic clean and sanitary without one?
I don't know if anybody here has an Earthworks to know. Oh, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, many microphone companies sell aftermarket phone windscreens, but you can also go to a company like Rycote, which creates a massive selection of wind protection accessories for all types of mics.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Earthworks was known as instrument measurement mics as much as for performance mics. They're incredibly flat. Sometimes that does not do well for recording human voices. I've heard people use them on violins and things like that, but it's just a special purpose kind of a thing. So normally it's not used for voiceover.
All right. Well done. That was a great buzz of questions. So for the producers, thank you for your fine work. Yet again, another one, 500 and X number. Really, really well done. Lots of great questions in the first hour and the second hour. And it's great to have the panel here. A great set of answers, great conversation. It's nice to have Mickey back. I was like, Mickey just showed up out of magic. I felt like we just say Mickey 3 times. Can we get Mickey to show up? So anyway, it's good to have him. And Tucker, welcome back we haven't had Tucker here for a while. Hopefully we'll get him here more often, at least on Tuesdays. For the audio, I'm willing to just limit it to Tuesdays, but good to have you guys here, and of course, great to have the rest of the panel here. Now we're going to tomorrow. We're going to talk about something. I don't have my notes in front of me. So anyways, we're gonna talk about something that's very important tomorrow. In the second hour, I should open I usually have my notes open when I close the show, and for some reason I don't. So anyways, we'll talk about that in the second hour, and. And now we're going to jump into the after hours for the next 21 hours. We'll be discussing whatever comes up. All right. Talk to you then.
Happy day 532.